The honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I will truncate my comments, but the message is fairly clear. We have a democracy that's been around since 1867. It predates, frankly, when we actually had access to electricity. We on this side think it's about time we actually look at reforming a system that allows for parties like the present party and the previous Liberal government to have all the power with only 38% of voters, out of which there was only over half of the population voting. If you asked anyone, and I've traveled as a foreign affairs spokesperson for our party, and we have our government advising other governments about democratic reform. But if you ask anyone, is this an acceptable system where you have a minority of citizens being able to decide where the power goes and saying that that's okay, that the status quo is fine, they would actually look at you and say, what's wrong? And that's what we're talking about here, Mr. Speaker. We're talking about the fact that it's time we actually deal with democratic reform. And I have to say, this comes just after we had a government and a prime minister who wrote about the importance of democratic reform. In fact, Mr. Speaker, you know this. I'm sure you've read all of the prime minister's writings, particularly those before he was prime minister. He co-authored a paper on proportional representation. It was our prime minister who advocated for this. We're just simply saying we agree with him and let's get on with it. Because, Mr. Speaker, the old prime minister understood that in our system, and he lived through it, he saw those phony majorities of Jean Chrétien, and prior to that, where they had a party that only received less than 40% of the vote get all of the power. All of the power, Mr. Speaker. And it goes deeper than that, Mr. Speaker. It's deeper than that. It's when people go to vote and they say, and we're seeing this in the United States, which is very troubling, where they see that there is no opportunity to see their vote count. We have to change that because people are becoming cynical. Most people, the discussion I have often with people is that young people aren't voting. And they say, I don't know what's wrong with young people. I know what's wrong. It's not what's wrong with young people. It's what's wrong with our democratic system. They're smart, and they're saying, until you fix it, we're not going to participate. Because they're looking at the choices and saying, well, if I vote here, my vote is wasted. I mean, think of if you're in a riding, then there's a couple of them that always go conservative. And you're thinking, well, actually, I'm a Green supporter, or I'm an NDPer. My vote is wasted. They don't vote. They just decide not to use their franchise. Or similarly in a riding where they're typically an NDP and you're conservative. Your vote is wasted. That's wrong. It's the fundamentals of our democracy. And, I remember a quote from Governor Smith of New York, and he famously, a great populist, and famously said, the solution for all that ails democracy is more democracy. And that's exactly what we need to see in our system. That's what our proposal is about. We've seen it work so well. What we're proposing here, to take to Canadians, run on it, and unlike our Liberal friends here who made some weird statement about we aren't consulting, who also thinks we have a $400 billion deficit with our infrastructure, and he made that up. But for some reason they think that talking about it in the House of Commons, bringing forward a motion, running on an election, and then actually going to the people consulting somehow isn't consulting. It's the Liberal way, I guess. But we are serious about reforming our system so that every vote will count. And if every vote counts, then, Mr. Speaker, we'll have what they've had in New Zealand. So New Zealand has a very similar history as ours, a Westminster tradition. What did they do? They took what we are proposing here and put it into action. Not only that, they then had a referendum after a couple of years, just had it a couple of years ago, to say to the people of New Zealand, do you think it's working? Do you like it? Everyone said yes. And that's what we're talking about. So what you would have, you vote for the person you want to represent you in your riding and the party of your choice. It gives people more choice. It's very simple. And what it does is it actually allows for Canadians to see their vote actually count and realize it in their parliaments. And at the end of the day, what's happened in New Zealand, I know this might sadden some conservatives, but their toxic politics is gone. People actually work together. They actually work together to make sure that the business of the people comes first. And all of this, kind of toxic talking points and wedge politics which might be a reason for this party not to support the previous position of their Prime Minister, well, I would ask them to look at to Canadians, particularly to young Canadians, to say, let's reform our system. Let's make every vote count. Let's make sure that we take a system conceived in 1867 before we had electricity and modernize it so we can actually have a parliament that functions for everyone. And that's why I want all members to go to their conscience and say, do we want to improve things in our country? And if they do, let's change the system. Let's have democratic reform seen in our electoral system and vote yes for this motion.